So, President, we have Mayor Hedrick, Deputy Mayor Depot, Councilor McCabe, Councilor Sheffield, Councilor Piazza, and Councilor Norris.
And
Test.
now this is informing because since Steve was gonna be here tonight anyway to talk about the operations agreement, I wanted him to go ahead and talk about his, legislative request. He had requested a while back, and we're starting to pick up, and we'll talk about that later. But I want to go ahead and bring him to talk about his request and also the operations agreement between Legislate Health District and the City of Groton. One of the things, that the Branford Manor situation brought to light is that the city has an ordinance that talks about what Legislate's gonna do and legislate this and those kind of things. And the problem was Legislate was never involved in that conversation. So we went back, we looked at the history, we went back at the minutes, there did not appear to be any representation from Legislate involved. The ordinance is not how, Legislate conducts business with any of their other municipalities. So Steve and I were discussing, bringing the city up to, the standard that everybody else is using, with this agreement. So with that, Steve, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. Would you like me to start with the ARPA or the agreement?
You can go in either direction you want.
Okay.
I just wanted to lay out why you were here.
Sure. So I think I'll start with the operations agreement, if that works. So Ledge-Lite Health District covers 10 municipalities. In each of those municipalities, we have an operations agreement that essentially is an agreement between the municipality and Ledge-Lite Health District. It describes how we're going to use our public health powers, the Connecticut general statutes, and the Connecticut Public Health Code to provide services to our respective municipalities. As I'm sure you are aware, when Ledge-Lite initially formed, it was just the town and city of Groton. So at that time, there was no operations agreement between the city and the town and Ledge-Lite Health District. I don't know why. I wasn't here at that point in time. But the next town to join was Ledyard. At that point in time, the director, who was an attorney, put together an operations agreement that basically laid out the relationship. Since that time, we've used those operations agreements or a version thereof for all of our municipalities. So since I've been director, going on 8 years now, we've used pretty much exactly the same operations agreement. And I think that's a really important point. We provide the same services to all of our municipalities, so we don't treat any municipality differently. So, for instance, when the City of New London joined, they had a lot of references in their charter, and they had ordinance that referenced the health department. So we removed Ledge-Lite Health District, or requested that they remove the references to Ledge-Lite, because we use the Connecticut General Statutes and the Connecticut Public Health Code and our operations agreement to inform the work that we do. So it's something that exists in our other municipalities, and it doesn't exist in the city or the town of Groton. So as the mayor said, during our work with Branford Manor, it came to my attention that there was this ordinance, I think it's called 145, an ordinance concerning the Ledge-Lite Health District that I'd never seen before. Prior to me being director of health, I was the deputy director for about 8 years, and then prior to that, I was head of the Environmental Health Division. So it was news to me. It was the first time I'd ever seen it. So I asked the mayor to take a look, as he said, at the history to see if there was something that happened all of those years ago. I think it was promulgated in 2003. to see if there was any reference to Ledgelight being involved in the process, and he could find nothing. I did the same on my end. We don't have any record of it at all. So although the majority of this ordinance is in line with what we do in our operations agreement, there are parts of it that go above and beyond and would actually treat the city of Groton differently than the remainder of our municipalities. So that being said, I forwarded to the mayor a copy of our draft operations agreement for another municipality and suggested that I put together an operations agreement that mirrors the rest of our municipalities for consistency's sake. It's also something that's on my agenda to get up to date before my retirement date, which is next July. So the new director of health kind of has a clean run into it, so to speak. So that's it in a nutshell, and happy to answer any questions about that.
I will open the floor to discussion. Deputy Mayor Depot, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. Can you, I know you probably can't go into like detail because they're like probably detailed things, but give a summary or example of something that was in the ordinance that doesn't apply or shouldn't apply?
Let's see, off the top of my head, I know there are references to us being the enforcement agent for the City of Groton ordinance, this specific ordinance. So we can't be the enforcement agent for another municipality's ordinance. We would refer to our operations agreement, Connecticut General Statutes, and the Connecticut Public Health Code. That's probably the most overarching one. It makes us the enforcement agent for an ordinance that is only specific to the City of Groton.
Okay. I read through them, and I do think the agreement is easier to read and clearer and makes more sense. So, I know I appreciate everyone on both ends reviewing both of them because, obviously none of us were around when that was signed. So none of us were really aware. And I think, it's with the situation we have, all of the examples probably that we need to go, okay, this is what's in the agreement, this shouldn't be or should be or whatever. So I think it's a good thing to update and timely. So thank you.
Sure. And one thing I would add, something you said just reminded me, we've never used it. Either the City of Groton or Ledgelight Health District has never referred to this ordinance or utilized it in any proceedings or public health order or anything like that, so.
Okay, Councilor Sheffield, I see your hand. You're muted. Councilor Sheffield, okay.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, Stephen, and are we the only ones with an ordinance, in the county, or do you have other ordinances as well?
Yeah, in our 10 municipalities within Ledgelight Health District, this is the only ordinance specific to the relationship between the municipality and Ledgelight that I'm aware of. I'm sure there are none in those 10 municipalities.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, are there any other questions? Where are we? Councilor Norris?
So, I hope you can hear me. So I'm trying to understand, so this ordinance was approved back in November of 2003, and then this operations agreement is new? Is that what I understand here?
It is new to the City of Groton. It's in existence in either this form or a modified form of this for all of our municipalities. So it exists for 8 municipalities, just not the city and town of Groton. And the town of Groton is considering exactly what this council is considering tonight. So it's not new language, but it is being newly presented to the City of Groton.
Okay, thank you. And is the mayor the city representative on the board?
He is not, although it's not up to Ledgelight Health District to determine representation on the Ledgelight Board of Directors. For every 50,000 people, the municipality gets to appoint one representative. So it's up to the council to appoint, and that happens periodically. Appointments are for 3 consecutive years.
But at the moment, the city does have one representative.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And to address that point, Councilor Norris, we try to find somebody who is in a healthcare profession, because it makes sense to have someone with a pedigree on the board so that they could be of valued assistance to the board.
Absolutely.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Hearing none, I'll take a motion to move this to the mayor and council meeting of January 3rd, 2023.
So moved.
Second.
Second. We have a motion and a second. Any additional discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? Motion carries. Okay, Stephen, the funding?
Sure. So I'm sure everyone's very familiar with ARPA funding at this point in time. It's important to note that when this ARPA funding was created in Connecticut, they designated the municipalities as the entities that would receive those funds. There was no consideration given to health districts in the state of Connecticut. And it's kind of an anomaly if you think about, for example, the city of New Haven. They have a health department. So if the city of New Haven gets $1 million, they can allocate a certain percentage of that to their health department. But regional health districts, which are formed under state statute, were left out of the formula because although we fulfill the statutory obligation to have a health department in a municipality, we weren't the recipient of those funds, those ARPA funds. And obviously, Ledgelight played a large role in the COVID response. So in August of 2021, I reached out to all of our municipalities and asked for, after a whole bunch of different exercises, we determined that a fair ask would be for each municipality to contribute 1% of their ARPA funding. That would result in about $620,000 coming into the district over that 5-year period that the funds can be used. It goes through, FY21 through FY25. So I wrote a letter and to each of our municipal members, did presentations to various groups, city councils and so forth, ARPA subcommittees, and made our case for what we needed the money for, how we were going to spend it. And of course, we made sure that all of our ARPA requests met the guidelines that the feds put forth. So I'm not sure if all of you are looking at the letter that I sent Mayor Hedrick, but it's basically the same letter that I sent all of our municipalities. And I understand every municipality has a different method for looking at the money, deciding how it's going to be distributed and so forth. At this point in time, we've received a full 1% allocation from 9 of our 10 municipalities, as well as the borough of Groton Long Point and the borough of Stonington, which received money independent of the municipality themselves. So as I said, the total amount would be $620,000 if everyone contributed. Groton City's 1% would be $26,372. At this point in time, we've spent quite a bit of that expected revenue that would come into Ledgelight Health District for things like purchasing our mass dispensing van, which I'm sure if anyone got vaccinated here, they saw it. It's what we use to transport our supplies, our nurses, our workforce, everything we need to run those mass vaccination clinics for COVID. We purchased that relatively early in the pandemic because it's something we needed. We had a couple of large trailers that we towed behind a truck that we had, but we were doing a lot of clinics, and it was something that was very beneficial to the organization. We also purchased a natural gas powered emergency generator that powers our vaccine storage facility at our main office on Broad Street in New London. So if we have a power outage, we have a lot of flu vaccine, a lot of obviously COVID vaccine that needs to be protected. So it was basically an upgrade from an alarm system that we had, which would require our public health nurses to, if we had a power outage, to go to Ledgelight in the middle of the night sometimes and take all our vaccine and transport it in coolers to our partners at Lawrence Memorial to put it in their coolers until we could get our coolers back online. So we just finished the installation of that generator. So there are a lot of hard goods that are associated with the request, also a lot of staffing. We've hired additional public health nurses, community health workers that go far beyond COVID. Although, you know, of course, ARPA is COVID-related funding. But now, for instance, our community health workers, some of which we've hired with the ARPA funds, they're going to stay on staff. We have funded them through a number of different programs, and 4 of them actually participated in our work in Branford Manor, going out into the community and looking for complaints, so to speak. 3 of the 4 are Spanish speaking. So the request, the ARPA fund request, goes beyond COVID, and as everyone probably knows, the criteria for what you could spend ARPA funds on in the beginning changed pretty dramatically as the pandemic moved on. So some of the things we asked for in the very beginning, all of them in the cover letter, providing support for community members for isolation and quarantine, that actually is still being done today. With Mpox, the old monkeypox, and so forth, supporting staffing and material asset allocations for community testing and vaccination events. We're still doing COVID testing, COVID vaccinations, and our flu testing, and so forth. So it's all on that sheet. So although we are, you know, a year and 4 months past the request, all of these activities that we put forth in this letter are happening to a greater or less extent as we move forward.
Okay, thank you. I'll open the floor for discussion. Anyone? Deputy Mayor Depot?
Thank you, Mayor. I know that, I guess this is more a question for the mayor. We have not, as a council, approved any ARPA funds, correct?
That is correct. And we are going to take a step up in 2023 so we can move forward and allocate and distribute funds.
So are you looking for us to put this on the agenda for the next meeting and approve this expense first?
No, this is informing,
Okay,
and you received information from the police, you received information from the fire. This is information here. You've received information from COG in the past, about a year or so ago. So, but since Steve was gonna be here tonight, I wanted him to go through his request again. And I'm not moving this as a motion yet. What I'm gonna do is once we're in the process of getting people to you, and then I'm gonna talk to you later about how we're gonna move forward, because this has gone slower than what I'm comfortable with. And part of it is availability and stuff like that. But to answer your question directly, I'm not asking for a motion for this, for the next meeting. This is informing, and then at some point I will come to the council and ask for requests, and then we will start assigning monies.
okay. I do have a couple of questions for the director. So if we don't approve these funds, where do you expect to get your funding from?
We have various funding sources, and as I mentioned, all of our municipalities have approved our 1% across the board. So we think it's a very reasonable request. It's 1% of the City of Groton funding. We're going to do whatever we have to do in order to provide the public health services. So if all of our municipalities said, sorry, we're keeping our money, you can't have any, we would still buy that van. We would still find a way to buy that van. We have a designated fund balance, and there are specific allocations in that designated fund balance for emergency response, things like pandemics. So I could pull money out of that to purchase a van. I could pull money out of that to fund a generator or hire new staff if we needed to do that to provide those services to our municipal members. But we don't want to take money from our rainy day fund because the board has approved keeping about 30% of our gross operating budget in our designated fund balance. And since I've been director, I've been able to bring that fund up, and we're actually a little bit over 30% now. We manage our money really well, and we take care to spend it thoughtfully. So the bottom line is, if the city of Groton decides that they don't think this is a reasonable thing to give to Ledge Light Health District, we'll find it somewhere else.
I just want to say, I think that as a representative of the people, I think the people expect you to do your job as well as you do. And I think that 1% is a very reasonable amount out of this funding. I think it is our job. I don't think people realize logistically how you make that work. So I think it does fall on us to make sure that we are explaining to them how that works, why we should set aside money for it. So I know we're not voting on it yet, but I think it's a reasonable request, and I think it falls under something that we maybe don't have in our listed departments in the city, but it is essentially kind of another department. People think of the health district as another department, and I think in that way, I feel like especially we see with the Branford Manor, as soon as that became an issue, your staff jumped in. And I don't know what we would have done if you didn't have the staff or the funding or, management to figure that out. So I think it's important for us to make sure that we fund responsibly and put the money where it matters. And I do think that's one of those departments that matters to the people, even if they don't realize it, because they expect you to be there for the vaccine clinics and even aside from COVID. So I appreciate all the work that you guys do, and I think, again, it's reasonable to request 1% of the ARPA funds.
I should also mention the fact that we received almost 100% cooperation from our municipalities allowed us to present a flat budget again this year. I think we've presented flat budgets 4 of the last 5 years. So a 0% increase. We haven't had a per capita increase. And this allocation contributed to that quite a bit, because we look at our budget and say, do we need to increase our per capita rate in order to provide good public health services, not only in that fiscal year, but the next fiscal year? We try to, look down the road. And also the fact, I'm sure most of you are aware, the town of Groton actually pays the per capita rate for the city as well. So it's not a separate allocation that comes out of the city of Groton budget. It comes out of the town of Groton budget. Just another point associated with it.
And for the record, I am supportive of this. If you remember back during COVID, the vaccinations that were held, the lines that we had that had a 2 or 3 hour wait, and the clinics that were held, the testing, everything that's been done during COVID, the vaccines, everything has been, we've had a tremendous relationship between the city of Groton and Ledge Light, and I want to continue that relationship. So with that, I'll stop. Councilor Sheffield, you have the floor.
Yes, Stephen, how is the supply side of the COVID vaccines? Do we have sufficient amount, since we are certainly in a growing numbers of COVID cases? Hopefully this request will be sufficient as far as making sure we have enough supply of the vaccine to help our community. Will this, will this suffice as far as this amount?
So this amount won't fund the purchase of vaccine. We received the vaccine free of charge from the Connecticut Department of Public Health. We did receive ancillary supplies, needles, and things like that. We have to purchase some of those on our own now. It really, the part of the vaccination process that is supported by these funds are the staff for all the logistics that we have to go through, and the nurses that we hire on staff that are employees of Ledge Light to do the work. But there is no shortage. We have as much vaccine as we need to give the appropriate boosters at this time.
Hey, Councilor Piazza? Well, Councilor Norris, I see your hand next.
Can you just tell me, what is support for community members to isolate/quarantine? What is that?
So it's a really good question. So in our communities, there are always populations that are underserved who may not have the resources to do what needs to be done when they have COVID or any other infectious disease. So that actually allowed us, let's just say a single parent came down with COVID and they needed to isolate. At the time, it was 10 days. At the height of the pandemic, they couldn't go to work. We actually had, some of these funds were used, not a lot of them because we didn't see a lot of need, but some of those funds were used to put those folks up in a hotel. We actually had our community health workers bringing them food and other necessary goods so they could continue to isolate. Because if people didn't have the ability to feed their kids or do whatever else they needed to do just to go along with what they need to do to survive, then it's likely they would go to work and potentially infect other people. So equity is something that we put into the equation whenever we do our public health work, and that's a good example of it.
Got it. And then the last question is just thinking ahead beyond 2025. When it comes to personnel, I do see here public health nurse and also a community health worker. How have you given any thought, or what is your plan moving forward to maintain that 200,000 in the budget?
Yeah, so the majority of our public health workers, and we currently have 4 on staff, although it only, it says we'll hire a. We have 4 community health workers, and they are largely funded externally, not through per capita dollars provided by our municipalities, through various grants. They work on a number of different grants, our opioid work. They are funded by the ELC funding stream, which is the Environmental and Lab Capacity Grant from the Department of Public Health. So we have a very strong record of going out there and finding the grants from federal, state, private foundations and so forth to continue to fund those positions. And they're critical to our work. So that's not to say in 2 years or 3 years, we won't have to go back to our municipalities and say, this is, our current per capita rate is $7.57, I believe. We may need an increase at some point in time to do that public health work. But right now, we don't need that, and we don't expect to, because we're able to fund those positions with other external funding sources.
Have you given any other thought, this may be out of your purview, actually, to deal with mental health?
Yeah, it is out of our purview, but definitely that's something that's in our consideration. So we work with our community partners when it comes to addressing needs that people may have, public health needs, who are in some way affected by mental health. So that's not specific to COVID or anything specific to ARPA. It's something we do every day. So if we have, let's say we get a complaint about hoarding or rodents in a specific location, depending on the municipality, we'll reach out to the social services or senior protective services, or TVCCA, multiple agencies who deal more directly with the mental health side of those public health issues. So it's really a partnership between all of those other organizations and Ledgelight, but we don't provide those services directly.
So do you get involved at all in particularly talking about COVID and long COVID individuals that could not work and get into a situation where they may be evicted because they can't work and they haven't been able to have a job? Do you have some type of involvement or coordination with the town in terms of placing people for emergency shelter?
No, other than what is explained in our requests. We do have a pot of money for short-term assistance specifically associated with COVID, and we were allowed to use that for mpox, for monkeypox as well. But no, not as a matter of routine. That's not something that's in our purview.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Hey, Councilor Piazza, you have the floor.
Thanks, Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Mansfield, for coming.
Sure.
Just, the questions, I remember this being presented, a little over a year ago. I'm just wondering with COVID, even though we have some ramp up in numbers, but it doesn't seem to be as detrimental as it was in the beginning. So are you, expecting expenses toward COVID, vaccine clinics open and so on, equipment, PPE equipment, so forth, to be not as in demand, and so therefore it wouldn't make such a chop in the monies received? And my other question would be, hand in hand, does this include also in-home test kits?
The answer to your first question is yes, we expect the fact that even though COVID rates are rising, we expect to see more COVID cases across the state as the winter goes on. We don't expect our expenses to go up appreciably. The majority of the supplies that we get are from the state of Connecticut through other funding streams. We put in a request for 10,000 test kits about 3 weeks ago. We're waiting to hear on those, but we won't have to pay for those, so we won't be passing those costs on to our municipalities. So again, it really is the manpower associated with providing those vaccinations to the people that we serve. And I'm sorry for...
And how will those, and how will those in-home test kits be distributed?
Well, there are a number of different mechanisms. Generally, what we've done in the past is send a communication out to all of our municipalities and say, we have 10 municipalities, whatever our supply is, we offer them. They can either come directly to Ledgelight Health District and pick them up. When they were in short supply, we had a limit, but we never really had to enforce it because people came in and got test kits when they needed them. But we provide them to our municipalities if they want to distribute them independently. Our school systems also receive test kits through a different avenue, so we don't work directly with our schools because they have another way of getting them. So they're free to the public, and when we get them, we'll make sure we get them into the hands of people who need them.
Yeah, I just come to realize that the pharmacies also carry them, and also some of their assurances will pay for so many, usually at 2 at a time, and they'll cover them. My other question is, what are the hours of, I think you said you have 4 public health nurses, are they full-time, part-time, how many hours do they put in?
2 of them are full-time, 8 to 4:30, Monday through Friday, and the other 2 are part-time.
And another question would be, for the dedicated mass vaccination vehicles, I like that idea. So how would that be manned, and how often would it be running, per se? Do you have a plan for that?
Yes, so whenever we have a mass vaccination clinic, or any type of clinic, it's what we use to move. It's packed and inventoried, so we can get it out of Ledgelight Health District and say to the City of Groton Municipal Building in about an hour. Currently, we have 2 people, a primary and a backup driver, who are well-versed in setting up and tearing down. We've also worked with our hospital partners, Griffin Hospital, where they would provide some of the vaccination services or the testing services, and we would provide the material goods to provide those services. So it really depends on what the situation is, what the state of Connecticut is willing to do or willing to provide, but it's something we use all the time, and the City of Groton Municipal Building was definitely the primary location for our COVID vaccination campaign throughout the pandemic. It was just the best, centrally located throughout Ledgelight Health District, and a big empty space, and of course everyone in the city was very accommodating, and it was easy to run clinics here. So, and it's one of our designated mass dispensing sites in our preparedness plans.
And I noticed at the beginning of the pandemic and all the testing and so forth, that the military seemed to be involved. Are they involved in this
No.
plan ahead? The government doesn't come in with you at all?
Yeah, no, they really weren't involved much. In fact, we just provided vaccinations to, I don't have an exact number, but it was more than 1,000 corpsmen on the Navy base because of, I'll just say, issues in providing vaccinations. They couldn't do it themselves. They didn't have the resources to get it done. And we have a good relationship with the Navy, so they reached out to us and asked if our Medical Reserve Corps was willing to come on the base and vaccinate all of their soldiers, Navy personnel. So we did that just about a month and a half ago. So yeah, they haven't needed them much but we do have a very good relationship with them.
Nice, thank you for all your answers, I appreciate it.
You're welcome, thanks.
And just to elaborate on one of your comments, we have COVID test kits at the clerk's office. We also have KN95s at the clerk's office for masks. We also periodically get supplies from DEMAS, the Department of Emergency Management, Homeland Security. And when we get those, we let people know that there's the supplies so that people can come in. If you remember, we did do a couple different handouts where the state got a bunch and we got them and then handed them out. City did, town did, and London did, all the municipalities handed out COVID test kits and KN95s. Okay, any other questions or comments on this?
Could I just respond to, hey, I appreciate your extra note on that, on the kits and so forth and supplies. Is that something that we could incorporate in the winter farmer's market? To have those available so that as people peruse through, they might be able to pick them up?
Well, we can talk about it. Typically what we've done is if people want them, we ask for them, and we typically get them to city residents. If you give them the farmer's market, it wouldn't necessarily be for city residents, but we can talk about doing that. I mean, at one point, remember we were focused on, because we were focused on the city residents, but we could take a look at, do we want to have some out there?
Mayor, if I may, as I mentioned, we're expecting quite a large shipment of COVID test kits, not necessarily the ancillary supplies, N95s and so forth, but because we're a regional agency, we'd be happy to provide test kits at the farmer's market as long as we have the supply.
Okay, perfect. We'll work with that. Okay, anything else on this topic? All right, item C, I'll take a motion to move that to the mayor and council meeting of 1/3/23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstention, motion carries. Okay, thank you, Steve. I appreciate you coming out.
My pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Okay, I'm gonna skip over around the stage real quick, because I don't wanna get into that discussion while we have people standing around. The smoking ordinance, do we have the chief and, Parks and Rec director there?
Yes.
Yep.
All right,
Can't shut both.
Can't shut both of them. Need one door open.
You can sit there, sir. Oh, man, this is high. Turn your mic on. I wasn't talking yet. On the floor.
all right, so this is on the smoking ordinance. Just give me, this was brought up during the November, committee of the whole. There were questions on it, it was sent back, we revised it, massaged it a little bit, and so it's here. I will get you an electronic copy. Actually, I think everybody has an electronic copy today that was sent to you today.
Yes.
And for those of you that are here in person, there's a hard copy to you as well. But with that, Chief Mary, I don't know who wants to lead, doesn't matter to me.
All right, Mayor, as far as changing from the last presentation that we did, we revamped the whereas portion at the very top to include smoke, vapor, as well as any tobacco vaping waste product. That being in the park and rec, parks, beaches, and stuff like that. It was in the original policy, there was dipping and snuff and all that tobacco products. So that's in the area of tobacco products. So what happens when some individuals choose to utilize dip it comes in packets, and they often discharge it, the expended packets, on the grounds. So in an effort to control the, I guess, waste product littering, for lack of better words, of having all those little packets everywhere, and the act of dipping itself, as far as, you know, a lot of parts with dipping goes in hand with spitting out the after effects of it, saliva and whatnot. So we're trying to get a control of that. So we revamped that as to more cover the body of the policy, or I should say the ordinance. So Mary did those two. You'll see it's highlighted in red. We did take out, we moved some definition around. We put the definition of smoke or smoking in, which means the burning of a lighted cigarette, cigar, pipe, or any similar device, whether containing wholly or in part tobacco, cannabis, or hemp. So that defines what smoking is, and that goes to where we're trying to get this secondhand smoke or vapor out from harming bystanders that are not participating in the smoking or vaping. Then we also, if you go to page 2, under section 2, prohibited locations, we modified that as well. We took out items that are not presently within the city limits. We'll start from the bottom, section 11, we took out, I believe it was a medical facility, or holding facility. We left in the halfway house, because we do have halfway houses in here. We narrowed it down to what's within the city itself. Medical buildings, we took out the racetrack, the dog track, and all that stuff. So it's more geared toward the city and what's in it right now. If you have any questions specifically on anything that we may have or we may changed, we're here to answer whatever questions you have.
All right, I'll open the floor for discussion. Councilor McCabe, you have the floor.
Thank you. It's not really a question, but I just wanted to thank you for going back and taking another crack at this. It's a lot clearer and cleaner. I appreciate the effort.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Looking for hands. Deputy Mayor Depot.
I can't remember if I may not have asked for this, but I think you said you were using the state law to guide
Yes,
your, I don't need a copy of it necessarily, but can you give me does it have like a reference number or a CGS number or a public act or whatever the designation is?
Yeah, it's Senate Bill number 1201.
Thank you.
Very lengthy.
It's okay, I'll read it.
A couple things that I noticed, we're gonna need to change the finally approved to initially approved because it's a new thing. And then at the bottom, let me define bottom, under violations, it says, any person who violates this ordinance shall be subject to a fine. And then it says, have fine set by resolution. What does that mean? What are we gonna do with that, chief?
So I'll address that, Mayor. When we were here with the council previously, it was recommended by our finance director that we not put a dollar amount in an ordinance due to the difficulty of changing it. And he asked that we say that there's a fine, but the fine be set by a resolution, so that way if we saw in the future that we wanted to change it, either higher or lower, it's easier to do out of a resolution as it is, as opposed to an ordinance. So that was a recommendation from the finance director at the previous meeting. So I just kind of wanted to make a note of that. There's a fine, but they didn't, I mean, that was his recommendation. The council can do what they feel comfortable with. If we want to keep it at 120, it's been at that since 2013, but that's why it's kind of noted that way tonight. And we can make that change to keep it that way at 120 or set it as a resolution.
Yeah, I guess my only concern is that somewhere, somebody needs to know what the fine is, so they know what the penalty for violations are, because that may entice them to follow it more. But I'm not sure, I mean, are we you saying that for the future, we're gonna pull all the specific fines out of ordinances into one big ordinance? Is that?
Like I said, it was a recommendation from your finance director. I guess there's been dollar amounts in other ordinances that he's recommended they be not in the ordinance themselves. So that's just a note that I made on this based on the previous meeting.
All right, okay.
Doesn't say you can't keep it there. You can say that there's $120 fine per violation, and then the police department enforces that.
I understand. I think until I get my arms around this, as far as collecting all the fines under one ordinance, I should leave the fine in there. But Deputy Mayor Depot, you had a hand?
I think, I think that kind of makes sense to me, because I know, just because since the Parks and Rec director is here, this is what pops into my head. Every year, we do a resolution for the fees for the beach. If that were in an ordinance, we'd have to pass it several times. Instead, we have it in a resolution. So we would pass this ordinance the one time, and then we would pass a resolution that we could then easily change with one-time vote. That kind of makes sense to me.
Okay, that's how I'll present it to the council. I will also talk to the finance director and then come back to you under a separate discussion, regarding, that discussion. Who's hand? Councilor Piazza, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to piggyback off what the mayor said, so it's kind of in the direction I wanted to go as far as how is this gonna be presented to the public? How will they know about I'm assuming an updated ordinance in reference to smoking, so how would we get that out to the people?
Okay, that's a very good question. So the way that the process is, there'll be an initial reading, and then 30 days later, there'll be a final reading, or the initial approval and then the final approval of the ordinance. It'll also be published in the newspaper. Clerk Jacome, is that correct?
That's correct. I don't remember the steps per exact, but I would reference the charter, for example.
Yeah, the charter talks about how we're gonna do this. So within so many days of voting on it, it gets put in the paper. There's an initial reading of it, or initial approval rather, and then it goes for 30 days, and then we come and do the final approval, and that's how the notification is made publicly. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I'm thinking about like, say, concerts in the park per se, so, I mean, I've met people at the park and also out in stores and so forth, and they weren't aware, they're like, oh, what are things to do here, they're visiting family, whatever, and I said, I always do concerts in the park, so maybe those people would know, but I know that Steve had mentioned before that they would usually go out there and speak to the people, so it was not gonna be and talk to them, and most of the time people are compliant. So I don't see a big issue with it if people don't know. It seems like the police department do a really good job of communicating with the people and understanding. So, I think it'll be fine.
Okay, good, thank you. Any other questions or comments on this? Looking for hands, I see none. In that case, I'll take a motion to move this to the mayor and council meeting of 1/3/23.
So moved.
Second.
Second,
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstention, motion carries. Thank you, chief. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Mayor and Council.
Thank you.
Okay,
sorry about that. And the third point would be, where do we go from here? With some of the comments and the activities go on, how can we improve this? So with that, I want to start off with some of the citizen concerns we're going out there is talking about a renovation project versus a remediation project. So I pulled some definitions up, and a renovation project deals with basically beautifying an older structure, an existing structure, something like roofing, windows, siding, just beautifying it, and some landscaping. A remediation project deals with the removal of pollutants or other potential contaminants from various types of locations for the safety of personnel. And the reason I wanted to talk about these definitions, because one of the items that has been floated out there is, why wasn't a lot of this addressed in 2017? Well, the project back in 2017, when Related Management purchased the property, was a renovation project. It was siding, roofing, windows, upgrades to the boiler plants, limited interior renovations, and known issues of water infiltration, moisture were addressed on a case-by-case basis. So the project in 2017 was not a remediation project. So and that brings us to 2022. The activities currently going on in 22 are, for the most part, a remediation project. So Related is in the process of addressing, moisture infiltration by help mitigating the humidity levels within the buildings and all that by replacing the vapor barrier within the crawl spaces that's been torn and damaged over the years. Replacing the PEX piping that is within the crawl spaces and the basements because there's been many leaks and issues with that piping, so they're replacing that with copper. So the number of leaks will greatly be reduced. And replacing the insulation within the crawl spaces of many of the buildings, along with the installation of new air conditioners within each of the apartments. And with that, the owners are replacing the wall receptacles with new receptacles that are compatible with the air conditioners, just due to the electrical services that are available within these apartments. And the buildings with basements are going to have a central dehumidification system installed that's going to be ducted throughout the basements. Another item that's been floated out there addressing concerns is Connecticut General Statute, Chapter 135, which is the Uniform Relocation Assistance Act. This act only comes into play if, in this situation, if a governmental entity displaces a family or a person from the apartment or home for that. And Chapter 135 goes through the process of how is that to be done and how are the costs handled during that activity. So what does this mean? Chapter 135 is not applicable in this situation because both Ledge Light Health District did not displace any residents and the city of Groton did not displace any residents. Related relocated some of the residents on their own accord, so Chapter 135 would not come into play in this situation. So the next aspect I want to talk about is some of the permit inspection activities. Currently, our department has over $2.2 million in permitted construction activity. There's going to be more applications coming in. I estimate probably another 50 to 60 applications, which could total over $1 million. Some of those contracts are still being negotiated. So with these permitted activities, we have performed 106 inspections as of Friday. And we've had 144 permits issued to date. Yes.
You just mentioned, are they just in the remediation project, those
Yes.
permits? And okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Yeah. So at Branford Manor, we have 16 buildings with basements. There's going to be 32 dehumidification rooms that are under construction because there's 2 per building, just because of the configuration of these buildings. They're a little L-shaped, so there's no direct communication from one L to the other. There's a very small corner that touches each L. And we have 30 buildings with crawl spaces, so there's 60 crawl spaces. 16 crawl spaces. Currently, they've replaced the poly with new poly, installed fiberglass insulation, and a rigid board insulation underneath that that's been taped and sealed. Since that method was a very time-consuming and labor-intensive process, they have changed to doing a closed-cell spray foam insulation, which is actually a more superior product in a situation like this because it'll seal any penetrations, you know, through from the crawl space into the tenants' apartments and all that.
Hold on a minute, Joe,
Yes.
let me add something to this.
Yes.
There was a lot of discussion in different places about why wasn't the crawl space insulation done back in 2017. If you go look at the documentation of the work that was conducted, insulation was removed from the insulation item for the crawl spaces was removed as an item, and a credit of $430-something thousand, I think it is, was give back to the project. So that overall project of doing crawl space insulation was not attempted, not done.
Correct. And the insulation that was there, I'll just say last year, was on average an R19 insulation. The credit the mayor mentioned was scheduled to be an R30. What they're installing now is a minimum of an R30 insulation that's going in. So, and the code minimum is an R30 in a crawl space situation. So based on the current activity and the permits issued, you know, our department is looking at performing over 1,200 inspections. Seems like a lot. It is a lot. However, several inspections are being done concurrently, depending on the work activity and when we're scheduled to go in. As an example, you know, talking to the project manager today, we're going to be scheduling going back into some of the crawl spaces to do, you know, another inspection, which is going to entail roughly half dozen inspections because it's going to cover several permits that have been issued. So that way we don't have to go into crawl space for looking at the plumbing, crawl space for looking at the insulation, electrical. We're just going to go in there once, get it all done. So it's going to be a kind of a concurrent situation. One thing we are doing is there are going to be 418 exhaust fan replacements and installations. We are looking at every exhaust fan installation because one of the things that's being done is the new fans that are going in, they're going to be running continuously, but they also have an intermittent feature. So they're being set to run at 30 CFMs continuously. This is in the bathrooms, and they're being wired so there's a wall switch, so the resident can turn the wall switch on, the fan will ramp up. So we're making sure that all the settings are at 30 to 80 to help eliminate any future questions that may come up. Yes?
So you're saying that it's a continuous 30, and then if you hit the switch, it goes up to 80?
Correct.
For usage?
Yes. Yep. So there's going to be always air circulating.
Right.
And as they're replacing the fans, they're actually cleaning the ductwork out, in some cases replacing the ductwork, because some of the ductwork has been damaged, other ductwork can be just cleaned out. Also, as part of this project, the DWV, which is the drain waste piping, drain waste and vent piping within the crawl spaces is being replaced. They've done a couple of buildings right now. They're going to be moving forward with the remainder of the buildings with crawl spaces. Because a lot of that piping has been damaged, people crawling over it and over time, whereas the drain waste vent piping within the buildings with basements is in a lot better condition. There's still some repairs to be due, but those can be repaired versus replaced. And as of the 16th, 80 inspections related to some of these activities here. So where do we go from here? This is a subject that the mayor and I have been talking about for a while now. Our current housing code ordinance number 97, was adopted in 1994, and there has not been any amendments or changes to this document. Since 1994, the city has adopted a blight and public nuisance ordinance, which is ordinance number 202. So one of the things we have to do, we have to look at our current housing ordinance and our blight ordinance and do some coordination, because there is potential conflicts. So we want to eliminate that. And with updating the ordinance, want to take a look at some of the municipalities as to how they're handling some things, and, take some of the good information and hopefully in a few months be able to bring forward a revised ordinance for consideration. But this is something the mayor and I have to work on, some of the pros and cons, and probably get a little group together to hammer it out. So with that, any other questions?
Okay, I'll open the floor, excuse me, open the floor to questions. You see, Deputy Mayor Defoe, I see your hand.
I just want to say, I thank you for doing the presentation. It is one thing to have you present in verbally, but it is nice to see it written on the screen. And I do think it's a great idea to review the ordinance, it being so old. And I think too, sometimes you don't know what problems you have till they come up.
Right.
And even not necessarily issues that have come up with Branford Manor specifically, but the conversations that's brought up even amongst residents that I've talked to have presented other issues as well. So I think that will be valuable to look at that. I think there's probably a lot of updating that could be done too.
Yeah, and that's one of the tasks that we have. Our department is responsible for probably half dozen ordinances. We started looking at most of those to try to get those updated. Some can move quicker than others, but it's a very time-consuming and laborious project.
So on your end, more specifically to address Brentford Manor, have you had any conversations with them, or where you've found it difficult to communicate with them, or have they been responsive and communicative with you from what you can tell on your end?
There's been some difficulties, but most of that has been a lot of people going in many different directions, so it's just trying to get a little more coordinated. Lately, it's been more coordinated, so we're on like a regular schedule of going out there. We're either out there every other day or every day. So we're communicating in the morning to figure out what we're going to be inspecting, if we're going to be inspecting that day. Weather plays a big part in it, but there's been a lot more coordination lately.
So if a resident has communication from related, they're going to have an inspection. And as you know, there's an ongoing trust issue between the residents and the ownership. Can they just call your office and say, I am in unit, whatever the unit number is, and can you tell me what your last communication was with related, or where you stand with related? What's the next step on, can they get that for their unit from your office of what the exact plan on your end is?
I would be able to tell them if there's a permit issued for certain activities, as to whether it's ready for inspection. I would not be able to tell them that, because that has to come from the contractor, because they have to schedule the inspections, because we don't know exactly which activities they are performing.
Okay, but you can tell people, yes, they said they're going to, I don't know, redo your floor. They did
Right.
apply for a permit for that. You
Yeah.
can tell them that.
Yes.
Because I think, a lot of people question the information they're getting, either from, and we've got residents telling other residents, oh, they're doing my apartment, how come they're not doing your apartment next door? And there are a lot of moving parts to it. But I've been trying to encourage people, if they have a complaint, or if they are not sure, or if they just want verification that a permit's been issued, or any of those things, they can reach out to your office.
Yes.
And I think Denise is in your office, right? Is that
Yes.
who works?
Yep.
And I've gotten some positive feedback about her. So, I want to make sure people aren't discouraged from contacting our departments, because they're willing to communicate and they're happy to help wherever they can. But thank you again for doing all the detailed information. I am looking forward to seeing what comes out of the review of the ordinance, because it'll be interesting to see how much of that is kind of very outdated.
Right, and this kind of plays into the previous conversation with the smoking ordinance. The current rental housing code ordinance, I think, is 24, 25 pages. So if we do that again, that's a very expensive publication in the paper. So that's more of a reason to create a smaller ordinance and have a resolution that can be easier to handle, for future things. I'm not saying the housing ordinance would be that way, but it's an example you can use. You can cut down the legal expenses of publishing.
So one thing I did want to say is, people, so if you live if you are renting, it could be Bradford Manor, it could be Linton Avenue, it could be Groton Estates, it could be anywhere, and you have an issue with your apartment, the first recourse should be to call your landlord and file a complaint with your landlord. It shouldn't be call the building inspector and file a complaint with the building inspector. You need to give your landlord an opportunity to fix the problem, and then if that problem is not fixed, then you need to contact the building inspector, and we will get involved in new inspections and accountability and things like that. On May 6th, there's a lot of people that came out, and a lot of issues were identified very quickly. And so in the last few months, we've circumvented some of the proper procedures by taking information off Facebook or taking information from a text. Anything in order to try to get these problems fixed. They have a due date. They're trying to get all these problems resolved by the end of February. And then, so what happens 1 March? 1 March, people, if there are issues, then people need to notify the maintenance office, the management office. And then if that doesn't work, then they come to us. So that's the proper procedure. So we are working with Related. I have a meeting, John Burt and I have a meeting with Related every week. We have a meeting with HUD and Blumenthal's office every month. And as a result of those meetings, there have been major inroads to getting these apartments fixed. We're almost up on Christmas. They're trying to get everybody back by Christmas, but they don't think they're going to get everybody back. There are 4 specific individuals that are refusing to come back for various and assorted reasons, and those are going to be addressed as they can. So, but they're trying to get everybody else back into their apartments or into an apartment on site and get them out of hotels. And then for those that are still going to be in hotels, we had this during Thanksgiving, John Burke and I got involved to make sure that people had food for Thanksgiving, doing the same thing for Christmas. So, those are the kinds of things that we're doing. Any other questions from council? Looking for hands. I see no hands. Okay,
Okay,
with that, we'll move on. Thank you, Joe.
thank you.
Yeah, so we, as I putting the city calendar together, we put up our dates here for the mayor and council, first and third Monday, and the committee of whole on the fourth Monday. Times have remained the same. The dates are in front of you on the last page. So I'm just looking for approval, and that will be recorded in my office for the future. Thank you. We can move this to the mayor and council, correct, Mayor? Yes.
Okay, then I'll take a motion. Well, first of all, yeah, I'll take a motion to move this to the mayor and council meeting of 1/3/2023.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Okay, hearing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, abstention, motion carries.
Liabilities and concerns about dogs, around children, and so on and so on. Know what that was gonna, how that was gonna be.
Understand, but the liability of the dog park is gonna be their liability, it's not the city's liability. So what I'm interested in is, are we ready to move forward to sell this property? Then they're gonna tear down that building. I mean, this is all gonna be codified on what they're gonna do and the easement and everything else. So that's what I'm trying to get to, is to move forward on this, and I want to find out what needs to be answered in order, so that I can bring this to the council for a vote. So that's the only question?
Yes, for me, right?
Percentage of children is the total number of residents. Okay, then I'll see
Thank
if I can get that. Counselor Norris?
I just wanted to say, all my questions have been answered. I am ready to move on with this, and I, support it 100%.
Thank you. Counselor Piazza? Your hands up. Is this a continuation or? Okay, never mind. Are there any other? All right, so where are we going? All right, I think I can get the answer to that. I'm gonna ask, for a motion to move this to the mayor and council meeting of 1/3/2023.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstention, motion carries. And the last thing is, in the last year, we've canceled the second mayor and council meeting several times, and I've tried to have some special committee of the whole so we can work on this ARPA thing and get it going. And at one point, I looked to see if I could cancel that second mayor and council meeting, but I can't because it's in the charter. So the two mayor and council meetings are in the charter. The committee of the whole is not in the charter, and the group committee meetings are not in the charter. So the question I have to the council is, are you finding the group committee meetings useful and helpful and productive at all? Or would they be better served by replacing them with a second committee of the whole? So with that, I'll open the floor for discussion. This is informing only. We're not gonna make a commitment out of this tonight, but I do wanna bring it up for discussion. So with that, I'll open the floor for discussion. I'm looking for, okay, Deputy Mayor Depot, I think I see your hand.
Thank you, Mayor. I think with at least as long as I've been on the council, the volume of things that are in our group meeting agendas doesn't always warrant a monthly meeting. I'm wondering if it might be effective to make those quarterly, and then if we have an issue that we want to be expedited, we can call a special group meeting through the clerk's office. I think that might be a more effective way to do that, because we do end up canceling when there's nothing on the agenda. And again, even over the last 5 years, the volume of things on the group committee agendas is not so urgent that we need monthly meetings. I don't think. That's kind of where I stand on it. So I think we maybe could do quarterly group meetings and then replace those as needed with a committee of the whole meeting instead. I think that would be a good idea, and that I would be in favor of that.
Okay, just for anecdotal information, the town council wrestled with this several years ago, and they went away from committee meetings, and the reason they went away from committee meetings is because they basically rehashed the whole meeting again at the committee of the whole meeting, and they found they were being ineffective. I don't know that that's our case here. All I'm saying is we're getting a lot of, I'm trying to bring and get things done, and a lot of things are coming out of the committee of the whole. So let me recognize first on hands, Councilor Sheffield, your hand's up.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea, going quarterly, unless, there's gonna be a referral coming from you as far as, giving something to a specific committee for us to work on.
Right.
If there isn't anything coming from you to be referred to a certain committee, then yeah, I would think, to substitute, anything with ARPA that's coming up that we can substitute, put in place, that's probably a better idea.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Piazza?
Mayor, I agree with Deputy Mayor Depot and Councilor Sheffield. I think it should go quarterly. And how I see it is that things I work on with, there's not everything is addressed. But I mean, I do look at everything. But for me to move on some things, to contact some people, it takes me a little longer. So I think if I had a good 3 months to be able to research more and contact the office and the people I need to get in contact with, that would definitely be helpful, because I do feel like we're kind of like the grassroots of what our constituents are asking for. So I like to research it more. Thank you.
Okay? Anyone else have a comment on this? Okay, if not, I will take this internal, and I'll get with Sue and Edward, and we will come back to you with a recommendation. And I'm gonna wanna start this in next year, in January next year. Let's see, where are we? And I think that's everything. With that, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion to adjourn?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention, motion carries. Thank you, counselors, for coming out tonight. Merry
Thank you.
Christmas.
Merry Christmas, all right, all.
Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you for not
Thank you all.
bringing your sickness here.